The issues I am highlighting in this video are drawn from my recording Giving Way to Fruitful Years from the album Days of Sun and Days of Rain. Let's look first at the introduction. One important function of intros is to set up a sense of expectation, so the listener is drawn into thinking about what is going to happen next. This intro seems conventional enough. Percussion and rhythm guitar kick off and are joined by bass and Ebow a few bars later, all playing repeated patterns. The underlying harmony played by the rhythm guitar on the chord of E minor, which the bass reinforces by stressing the tonic note of E. But I want to draw your attention to the Ebow line. An Ebow is an electronic device used by guitarists to play sustained notes, emulating the sound of a violinist bowing strings. We might expect the sustained note played by the Ebow to also be an E, but the note here is pitched 5 notes above on the note B, which theorists refer to as the fifth or dominant of the scale. Our ears are subconsciously wanting this dominant to resolve to the tonic or keynote of E, and whether we know it or not, most of us are subconsciously waiting for this to happen. So using a sustained dominant note engages the listener from the off. Have a listen to some of this. Section A begins at bar 17, and the guitar now plays a melodic line. At this point, the Ebow moves an octave higher to a top B. Why do I do this? It's because at this point, I want the attention to focus on the guitar melody. The original lower Ebow note was at a similar frequency to the melody on the guitar, so it was making the music sound a bit cluttered here. Moving the Ebow to a higher frequency overcomes this problem, and it's easy to do in Ableton. Simply copy the original waveform and move an octave, 12 semitones higher. Let's have a listen. Next, I want to say something about background-foreground sounds. In section A, it is the guitar which is firmly in the foreground, playing an interesting melody, with the bass playing more of an accompaniment role in the background. In section B, these roles are reversed, and this contrast adds a degree of interest to the development of the piece. Listen as the instruments swap over from background to foreground and vice versa. In section C, another layer is added, a second guitar adding a counter melody. There is a danger that when we add new tracks, the overall sound can become quite muddy. So every time you add something new, always ask yourself, is there anything I can remove here? Sometimes the answer may be no, but often it can be a good idea. Clarity of texture is always worth aiming for. Listeners appreciate being able to hear the various musical lines. So when my new guitar line is introduced, I decide to drop out the Ebow for the sake of clarity. Now moving on to the transition from section C to section D. I talked in earlier videos about overlapping phrases at section boundaries to make things smoother, and this happens here as the final note of the guitar part rings on into section D. Here I use a favourite musical trick of mine, something I call a musical handover. The final guitar note, a high B, is picked up by the Ebow player. Like handing a baton over in a relay, it provides a seamless movement of note. Have a listen. And now with the other instruments. Moving on to section G, I want to talk about collaboration. I first put the demo track together and then shared it with a bass player friend of mine via Splice, an online space where you can share Ableton files with collaborators you choose. In section G, the guitar part holds back a bit, and I want the bass player to step into the spotlight. If the bass player looks at the waveform display for the guitar, he can see the gaps and anticipate putting in a fill. Have a listen. Whether you are collaborating or not, it's a good idea to look at waveforms of recorded parts to identify gaps which other tracks can make use of. Finally, in section K, I make further use of drones. Drones can be really effective in situations where you don't have any definite ideas for chord progressions, or perhaps don't want the distraction of changing harmonies. A drone is usually a single note or chord which sustains for a long time. There is a danger they can sound quite flat and lifeless, so aim to maintain interest by adding vibrato or changing dynamic levels. This can be done by using automation post-recording, but in this track I do this manually by subtly adjusting the position of the Ebow on the guitar throughout the line. Have a listen. So, from my commentaries on this piece, we can now begin to round up a few musical principles which can be taken into your own Ableton projects, regardless of genre. Number 1. Use drones to help bind a section together. Using the tonic or keynote makes a lot of sense, but there are other possibilities. Use your ears to find something that sounds interesting, and make sure your drones have some life tonally speaking. For clarity, think about moving some parts an octave higher or lower, so that there is no single frequency area that becomes too cluttered. This often provides more effective solutions in relying simply on track volume adjustments. Number 3. Background, foreground. Simple enough. If a solo voice needs to be heard, other parts should probably be holding back, providing accompaniment. It's like a conversation between a group of people. Number 4. Overloading textures. If you add another part, might it not make sense to let another part go for a while? Always ask, is this part really necessary? It is so easy to let parts keep looping when they are no longer needed. Pruning retrospectively can often be a good idea. For good examples of this principle, listen to the music by artists such as Brian Eno and also Radiohead. Densely textured, but note the clarity. When moving from one section to the next, we don't always want abrupt changes. Consider fuzzy boundaries where some parts from one section feed over into the next. Number 6. If you want to add further musical activity, look at the waveforms for existing tracks so you can see as well as hear where the spaces are. If you are improvising a new part, it's good to be able to see in advance where there are gaps you might want to fill. I hope you have enjoyed this video and find it useful. You can hear the full track by following the links given below the video. And of course, constructive comments are also most welcome.